unfortunately, if anybody here has studied much about the brain, there's nothing but big words. But anytime we come to those big words, I'm going to break it down, and feel free to stop me at any point, ask a question. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions in this. It's only 5 pages, but there's a tremendous amount of material and image involved with this study. Just over the last 20 years have we truly understood more about the mind than we have an entire existence of mankind. And that's because of the technology. You can't just open up somebody's head and look at it, poke around and see anything, because even if you were able to do that ethically, you would disrupt what you were trying to study, so you wouldn't be able to study it anyway. So only now that with really good fluoroscopes and all that, I'll talk about that in here, can we actually study these things. But I'm glad to see everybody's smiling faces, and I think everybody now has a copy. Was there enough copies, Ms. Courtney? All right. Everybody has a copy of the lesson that I have planned. I have some pretty big PowerPoints that will be on tonight. The first one is an interesting little image. Well, the first one is my opening here. And, of course, it's just, there we go. It's an interesting image. If anybody's ever heard of the Michelangelo painting, it's in the Sistine Chapel, of God and man. Well, one thing a lot of people don't know about this painting is if you lay an overview of the brain in the painting, you'll see that God is nestling or lounging within the human brain here. It's all right here. We're talking about the medulla, the pituitary gland, the optic chiasma. I'm very detailed. They didn't have this detail in Michelangelo's day. They didn't have that kind of detail. These things weren't even named at this time. But yet this painting with God in it, showing him basically bringing consciousness to Adam, he's setting in a brain. And so it was just a fascinating little study there, and I saw that, and it kind of blew my mind. This is before x-rays. This is before sterile surgery in the Western world. This is before any kind of psychological examination or test. This is before anything that we've actually got written on human other than basic anatomy from war wounds.
You're a brilliant man, but I'm going to have to learn you how to hold a microphone.
Okay. So even though they knew a little bit about the shape and color of the brain because of war wounds, drastic fatal injuries at the time, there wasn't actually a medical study that detailed and broke down these things in a clean and orderly manner so they could actually identify these sections and these parts. So I was just completely fascinated by this. But it's just a perfect outline of a brain, and I've never noticed it before until I did this study. So I found this. I've been through, I can't tell you how many neuropsychology and neuroscience journal articles to write this. And I did my best to keep a lot of the humongous scientific writing out of it, but there's just a little bit in this. But anyway, when we talk about the battlefield of the mind and in the faith versus science, faith and science, in the beginning, so in looking at the way God has created mankind, the preeminent divide that separates us more completely from any other animal is the mind. For within the mind rests the heart and very soul of who we are. A lot of people don't realize when you talk about mind and you talk about heart, they are both parts of our consciousness. They are both parts of our mind. They both reside in our brain. Different parts of our brain. We're going to go through all the different parts of our brain and where you'll find the heart and where you'll find the logical and planning portion of the mind. It's very cool differences there. And if you give me the next slide. Okay. Now, everybody has this image on the next page. I'll go into it more detail. I just wanted to be up there and ready for when I'm ready to look at it. But I want to go on with the rest of this first page, just my little introduction here. All right. The mind is a supernatural, God-created consciousness that is contained within the physical constructs of the brain. For by no other means are we created in his image more so than the complexities of the mind, consciousness, and brain. It is this wonderful complexity that gives rise to a being that in God's image has the capacity to love, hate, forgive, nurture, and in it all choose with a fierce free will every action in response to every opportunity around our entire existence. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. It's from Genesis 1:27. Of course, when we talk about being in his image, we can't touch fingertip to fingertip, one side of the universe to the other, as he does easily. He encompasses everything. But in the complexity of the ability in our minds to think, to love, to choose to love him, to choose to love our families and our friends, and even to choose to hate. In those things, that in God's own nature, through his own word, he's described his own feelings of these toward mankind, as he did before the great flood, and as he did for giving us his son, Jesus Christ, ultimate sacrifice in true love. So you look at it, he is completely omniscient, and he controls everything. But yet, in this small being that he created in us, he put a spark of that. He put that spark that makes us able to do those most crucial things that make God who he is. Love, create, plan, dream, hope, nurture, care, hate, be angry with, good and bad. Like all things concerning mankind, in the beginning there was purity, clarity, and a hand-in-hand walk with God in the Garden of Eden. Unfortunately, with the introduction of sin, the mind was the first thing to be corrupted. In fact, it is the fallibility of the mind and the heart that is contained therein that allowed the fall to occur. Unlike the mind of God that is unfallible, infallible, and universally expansive, the vessel of the human mind, the brain, is prone to vulnerability. That is not to say that in any way that the human mind and brain is not the most complex and glorious of God's creations. For even a spark resembling God's own mind is awesome and completely without compare in the natural world. As God told Job from the whirlwind, there is only God who can put, sorry, I got but it should have been put there. I missed that typo. Am human. Knowledge within the mind. And he says from the whirlwind, who has put wisdom in mind? Who has given understanding to the heart? This is from Job 38:36. All my scripture references are from the New King James Version. It's kind of the version I'm dabbling with right now. I've been through a lot of other versions, but this is the one I've been studying in of late. It is God himself that links the mind and the heart together as unique entities within one consciousness. The mind being of thought and logic, and the heart being of emotion and connection. It is a balance within these two entities that a sound mind exists. There are physical and structural components to the miraculously God-designed brain that give rise for both the mind and its logical memory and the heart and its emotional memory. Do you realize that's what separates the mind from the heart? The mind is our logic, and the heart is our emotions. And without one, we don't truly grasp the other, and without the other, we don't truly grasp the first. And it just intertwines in a way that only God can comprehend and put in us. To this day, there's certain parts of the mind that we're far from understanding, like truly how memory is stored and why. We know it happens in connections, and we're going to get to that here in a little bit. But it is just fascinating, completely fascinating when you delve into brain studies, brain sciences. Exactly. And you know what's even more outstanding than that? Our olfactory nerves in our nose, they're directly connected to our limbic system. And our limbic system, you're going to find here in a little bit, is our memory creator, but also our emotional response unit of our brain. And in its being, the first thing that interacts with the association center of memory in our brain is our smell, because it's directly hardwired straight into our limbic system. So odors can take you back, like you open up a cedar chest and all of a sudden you're a little girl by your grandma's chest, or your grandfather's chest, or you may open up and smell mothballs and be taken back, or you may open up and smell the pumpkin pie or the turkey from Thanksgiving, and for that split second, your association pathways, they ignite, they come fire, and you can just remember almost every Thanksgiving from that time all the way to the first memory of a Thanksgiving you had. It's just amazing how the sense of smell connects so much to our thoughts and emotions. And later on when I get into that section, it's even part of the human attraction and passion and all that. It's all odor based. It's really amazing. Yes, Pastor Tim. To what? Oh, yes. If I dive into it right now, I'm going to lose you. So I'm going to get there. I will get there, yes. We're going to talk exactly about what parts of the brain are the heart resides in. And then some, uniquely enough, some science calls the heart part of the brain the animal portion because it doesn't use higher logic. It's emotional driven, just like a mating lizard would have. No, I'm keeping this in the animal kingdom as much as possible when it comes to metaphors, because for that very reason, everybody wants to go home and comfortably rest with their significant others tonight, not in peace but in comfort. Okay. The anatomical and physiological components of the mind. So this is where we're going to start looking at this image I got over top of us. The brain reads like a map for each type of thought process and pathway. The beginning of the next page has the overall image as it is currently understood. We know these things due to the fact that glucose, that's the simple sugar, used by the brain for fuel. See, the brain doesn't store energy. Every bit of its energy must come from the blood. That's why when you have low blood sugar, your brain doesn't function so well. Without blood sugar, your brain's out of gas. It's like trying to drive your car here to Vegas on an eighth of tank. It's going to... Well, we all have our moments. Anyway, we can tag this sugar with basically it's a mild radioisotope anyway, but it's an atom that can be seen under a fluoroscope imaging device. Well, what's different about that is that we can take an individual, put them under a fluoroscope, we can show them imagery of certain types, and we can see what in their brain is sucking up the glucose. We can touch their tongue with an electrode, gentle, torturing, or a taste. That's what happened to you on the head, huh? On the hair migrated elsewhere. Anyway, so you can touch these things, and you can see what area of the brain is utilizing the glucose. Because that which is using energy, the body's a very efficient thing. God created it very efficiently. So where the energy is being used, that is what is functioning. That is what is actually processing, just like a computer. If you looked at a computer with a heat scope, the areas that are doing the most work are going to be the warmest. It just is what it is. Okay? All right, so we tag the chemicals. Different tasks and imagery are shown to the participant, and glucose usage is recorded, which indicates higher activity within the particular area of the brain. So now I got this real big complex map. The good thing about this map is it doesn't have all the scientific words on it. This is the best map I could find that didn't tell you all scientific terminology for these different folds. The folds of a brain are called the sulcus. Anybody got an idea here why the brain is folded and wrinkly like it is? Nope. Surface area. Surface area. The more folds you have, it's like if you drive from here to Louisville, straight line, and there's no hills or anything, it's going to be a shorter distance. But if you took and put like 40 mountains between here and Louisville, and you went up and down each mountain, your trip's going to be triplicate in distance or more. So what the folds do, they add surface area. Well, why surface area? Because this upper part of the brain, all this outer shell, I want to dub it now the mind. I've got a pointer here, so I'm going to try to say it. So, whoops, we need to go back to another slide or two. There we go. All right, when we talk about the mind, all this wrinkly white, well, it should be gray, but it looks white here, but all this area here on your image, that is what I call the mind, the outer portion of the brain. It is nothing but neurons, and it's gray because these neurons aren't insulated. Anybody got an idea why these neurons might not be insulated? What happens if you have a ball of wire and it's all stripped out and somebody plugs it in? It's going to spark and short circuit everywhere. Well, the brain doesn't do that unless you have epilepsy, unfortunately. But what it does is it allows for millions, there's 100 billion brain cells, right? Each brain cell can attach to over 100 additional brain cells with different synapses and almost an infinite number of combinations. It is these gaps, so we'll get to that in a minute. Do not be alarmed if you do not understand the whole thing. as it is quite complex. Even in this simplified form, it is difficult to describe the miraculous design God has bestowed on the human mind. I've made myself say I'm going to follow this sheet and go out with your questions, but try to stay on here, so I'll lose it. The myelin, it is to allow maximum contact points, because our knowledge, our ability to record, our ability to associate, our ability to do anything logically, to do math, to plan, is in the outer cortex, in the mind, the separate part from the heart. And yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Somebody that like me, say that I'm in, got 6 major finals, 3-hour essays, all that coming on, happen to remember about 100,000 facts, or at least connect 100,000 facts. I will burn up more energy in those that 1 week of study. Courtney, I'm sure, has been there. You'll burn up more energy. College kids, and even me, I'm 40 now. I get starving when I'm like, and that's not because I'm bored, it's because I'm burning glucose. So I learn to eat fruit. I like to eat fruit and healthy snacks when I study, because it puts glucose or fructose and then glucose in my blood without making me overly starchy and over heavily. Try to stay away from pastas and breads and all that, but just eat some fruit and things that, to give me instant energy to keep that brain firing. Bananas are great because they give you potassium, and you use a lot of sodium potassium gates in your nervous system and your muscles. But yeah, mental fatigue, mental work will drain you as much as physical work. As a matter of fact, your brain uses 25% to 30% of your oxygen and your nutrients every day. And that's not even going for a week or a 2-day crash study course. That's every day. Which goes to the reason, well, everybody's like, well, how can there be a God, right? Well, how could there not be a God? Because you realize our brains are very wasteful if you're talking about evolutionary, if you're talking about animal. If we did not have a God that wanted us to have the ability to love and to know and to feel and all that, we'd just be amoebas. Amoebas are very efficient. They have no thoughts. And that 25 to 30% that we waste, we don't waste, but you know what I mean, that is used to maintain our big brains, wouldn't be needed. So, and if you were to follow the school of evolution, you would say, well, brains wouldn't work because brains actually take away more than they give. But anyway, that's just one of the little things I use when I get to dealing with. Yes. And so we talked about how the brain is made of over 100 billion neurons, also known as brain cells. Each of these brain cells are connected to hundreds of other cells by hundreds of bridges called synapses. The bridge between two cells where little electrical sparks, chemical sparks go between two brain cells is called a synapse. It is these connections that allow logical thoughts to be created and short and then long-term memory to be stored. Surprisingly, the main difference between short and long-term memory is location, or more correctly, localized and generalized areas utilized for each. Short-term memory is stored in a small area of the brain with a few active pathways. This is directed by the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is just this little piece of the brain, and it acts like a recording head on a VCR or a CD DVD burner. It formalizes the connections to store memory. It's all it does. It tells this cell, you're going to connect to that cell cell is going to connect to this cell, and when you three connect, this is going to spark the memory. Whether it be stored on whatever protein or whatever, they're still working on all that. We're not going to get into that this evening because we're years out from that. But as a memory is taking form from short-term into long-term, storage is spread out among various areas of the brain. So we had the short-term area, which is a small area of the brain in the frontal lobe, not too far from where our sensory input is. These areas are connected by many pathways so that so when we spread it out across the brain, the memory, the pathways are connected so that even if one pathway is lost or damaged, the information can be retrieved by a different pathway. Thus, the ability to be retrieved over the long term. So if you get hit in the head and it kills a couple brain cells here, or you have a minor pen stroke as we get older and it stops some cells here, our brain can learn to reroute to those memories. Yeah, basically, yes. It has a GPS system and a system of pathways that basically allows us to retrieve memory. And if it's in our long-term memory, That's why people, even with Alzheimer's, sometimes can remember things long ago. The first thing to go is the short-term memory because it requires more parts and pieces than the long-term memory. Long-term memory is scattered across the brain, and it is accessed from many different points. And short-term memory is, once again, in one small section. If you get a damaged amygdala or hippocampus, then you can no longer do short-term memory. Has anybody here seen the movie 50 First Dates? Well, that was a hippocampus and amygdala injury. Basically, she had one-day loop, and that's all she could remember. And as she went to bed every night, that memory would dump. This is actually a true disorder. It happens. It really happens to people that have amygdala injuries. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Yes, that is a form of systematic amnesia. Sometimes in PTSD, it's done that way, where people will bury the memory that caused the disorder. They won't know exactly why they have it, which particular memory caused it. They just know that it affects them. They wake up with night terrors. They'll have flashbacks. All these things where the actual memory is so terrible that it's blocked from memory, but the effects of that memory is still there. So they can't pinpoint it, but it's still nagging them. It's still terrifying them. Now I'm kind of switching gears here for a moment to talk more about the heart. And my next title is the emotional control center of the brain, which is the limbic system, and we know it as the heart. Now I'm ready for the next slide, Randolph. Okay. When we talk about memory processing and creations, I talked about the cortex, the outer layers of the brain here. That's a thin gray layer that lies over all these folds, fissures, and wrinkles of the brain. Now this image I don't believe is in your packet. I didn't put every image here because it would take like too many pages to get it all done. So just bear with me as I deal with this section on the screen here. So with the brain and memory formation, we have all the gray matter out here, which is all of our common brain. Now on these underside layers, we have this little body here called the mammillary body, which right here says declarative memory. That's that instantaneous sensory memory. You can declare what something is. I got it. Then we have the amygdala right here. I talked about the amygdala and the hippocampus. Here's the hippocampus right up here. Here's the amygdala. What that does is these two things together, the amygdala processes emotional memory. How many people can think logically about their childhood, but then that smell and that maybe some colors or something else triggers the emotional part of that memory? So you start it logically, I want to remember that. And then your brain interprets it with your emotional system, with the amygdala and then the hippocampus. They're able to Rolodex that out and bring the emotional subset that was created during that memory formation and bring it up as a separate unit. Well, they'll try to say that, through billions of, the same reason why they say that if you put enough chimpanzees in a movie, in a room all typing on a typewriter, you'll eventually get Shakespeare. It's just they call it a law of probabilities, that if you have enough random chemical accidents in evolution over trillion, but if you look, except it's in time. And it's basically how many times did cells divide and change. The fact is, anybody that's really has an ounce, I can't even say it like that. Anybody that knows God and knows science knows there's no way in science to take God out of it. Because, like I said, 33% of our energy, 25 to 33% of our energy needed for this brain, what would be evolutionary, what would be the sense of that? It would be a waste. We would be amoebas. I mean, we would just be really highly drug-resistant amoebas. And I say drug-resistant because all of our known antibiotic stuff originally came from natural systems. See, bacteria don't like competition, so they make chemicals that kill other bacteria. And that's where antibiotics come from. They don't like competition, and that's how they survive. So we would just be really adept amoebas that are able to survive everybody else's toxins. Anyway, the human heart, or the center of emotion control within the brain, resides in the structures and the connections within the limbic system. The limbic system is made up of the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the cingulate cortex. A lot of big names. Just know that these parts together create the emotional portion of our memory and tie it in with the logic part of our memory. This is basically the processor that takes up everything that we have in our logic and memory database, goes with our visual memory associations, which is in the back of our mind, back of our head, and then the limbic system kind of puts it all together with the amygdala, which is the emotional center of our brain, to make a logical plus emotional memory structure. Any questions on that? I just don't want to blank everybody out. Yes. Yes, it is. It's talking about the campus, the hippos, and the amygdalas. Yes. We're on the outside. Okay. Anyway, we're going to jump past that, the rest of the scientific words there, and we're going to say this is a great little section I took from Dr. Annie Harper. She does these things on destruction and proper problems with the limbic system, and I'm going to list all the little things here that occur with the limbic system and the emotional part of our brain and what happens when we have damage. All right, the limbic system, it is largely responsible for how we interpret sensory input, especially our sense of smell. I mentioned that a little bit ago. How we code and remember sensory information and how we emotionally respond to it. The limbic system assigns emotional significance to everything we smell, see, hear, feel, and taste. It monitors both our internal and external environment. The limbic system is known as the seat of social and emotional intelligence and is the brain's anxiety switch. We also know it in the Bible as the heart, or sometimes it talks about the inner workings of a man. Exactly, because they're two parts of the same conscious entity. They didn't understand it at that time. We understand it more now, but they kind of got the gist of it. Well, God understood it all, and he tried to tell us early people that were writing this the best way they could how to say it, and they did a pretty good, pretty bang up job of it. If you read the Bible cover to cover, you'll understand that. Yes, sir. Yes, it's a very good reason. Yes, and now here, and this is a section I meant to add, and now I wish I had. I'm gonna, you hit the nail on the head. If you really want to remember something, enjoy it. Enjoy it sends it to the long term. The act of enjoying creates endorphins, which naturally create a reward pathway, which leads straight to the long term memory. I bet you everybody in here can remember their first kiss. Nobody, all right, without getting anybody in trouble, let's, never mind, never mind, let's back that up. All right, I bet you everybody in here can remember their first bite of ice cream. You can't remember your first bite of ice cream? Well, it's probably with your kid, in your memory, maybe, all right. You like fruit? Okay. I bet you everybody here remembers the first fun song that they heard or remembered, if they really tried. Now remember, you don't use it that often, but if you were under like hypnosis or under extreme stress and had to recall it, you would eventually get it, believe it or not, because it's in there. Anyway, if you enjoy something, if you want your kids to learn something, make it a game. If I want weeds clean out of the under the deck, I'm like, Josiah, go weed ninja. And he'll go under there and he will rip every weed up out of there because he's the weed ninja, right? You got to make it fun. Exactly. Like, well, I'm glad. But yeah, I mean, if you want to do something and remember it, you got to enjoy it. If you are dreading a subject, dreading reading it, I've had this. Yes, Miss Courtney. Oh, you have a question? I thought maybe your hand was up for a question. Part of it is, we're going to get to that with the next section, which is sin and the reward pathways of the brain. So I don't want to jump ahead yet on that. But yes. No, in the best tone, always yes. Oh yes. There's another part. Right, pleasant's the easy way. Torment and torture is the other way. Because why do you remember things that hurt you, or things that torture you, or things that torment you? It's for survival. If you put your hand in the fire and get burned, you're not going to keep doing it until your hand's burned off, right? Over and over again, unless you're really wired wrong. We'll get more to that a little bit later. But you know what I'm saying. Generally you avoid things that hurt, whether they be emotional pain. I think emotional pain, break my leg off, is better than emotional pain. To me, I think the heart hurts worse than the physical body. But you're talking to the guy that's been beat up pretty bad here and there. So that's just my personal standing. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well, the common sense part of the memory, yes. When you're talking like things for survival, things that prevent you from getting injured, things that prevent you from, you know, sometimes we learn from our mistakes, sometimes we don't. You have the unfortunate people that like fall for the same type of person that's terrible for them over and over again, and all the advice you pour into them, it never seems to change anything. It's very common. That's where you have an emotional override to the common sense hurt mechanism. Yes, Miss Terry. Exactly. That is the hardest place to be. I've had to read some dry journals. I'm talking 50-page, scientific, not in my topic, not interesting, terrible writing that I would, it's like you almost want to like rip your toenails out rather than have to read this thing. It's kind of like that bad because and it's just annoying. When you get decision relation like that, I used to never listen to music. This is when I bring things to music. If it's dry, I learned that I can put on a cello concerto or something in my ears and listen to some Yo-Yo Ma and just punch through, Bach's cello suite. I love that when I'm really having to do something extremely dry. It's like 2 hours long, and I just listen to that while I do my reading, and it sticks. It helps some. Yes, Miss Terry. Once again, we talked about the smell being the first direct connect sense to the limbic system, which helps store memory. So actually, yes, smell is another good way of doing it. Taste can too. Like you can put out like your candies, your favorite possible chocolate or candy or whatever it might be, fruit flavor, whatever it might be. And when you really want to remember something, pop in one of the most tasty things you have. But don't do it too much, or else you look worse than me in size. We got to have moderation, right? Exactly. Taste, yes, taste association and smell association. Well, we've learned so much more, Pastor Tim, than we used to know. But actually, it's true and it does work. So you can deal with. No, it's usually. I, God made our sense of smell, and He made our sense of taste, and He made our sense of enjoyment for that reason. Yes, go ahead. The most torture you could probably put a child through. Because you turn it dry. We just now recently in the last 7 years learned some of these things. Yeah, it would have been nice to know when I was going through some of these things because I'm telling you, I'm out missing some of my toenails. No. Mm-hmm. Right. It depends. You have that cutoff line. You're blessed with the ability to doing the lyrics and words and all. Right. You're note and rhythm. Right. Your note and rhythm study. You can understand the rhythm and note, but not the lyrics when you're studying. that's because you really enjoy music too. I mean, it depends on how your ties and attachment are to music. If your music you want to keep it strictly for fun, then you know sometimes you don't want to tangle that in with some drum study. Also, often musicians think more with the right side of their brains. I'm actually going to say it with a positive note, and sometimes I envy the musicians. Often musicians are more right brain centered. Often, so are left-handed people. A lot of musicians under as a population have more left-handed people than anybody else, any other category of employment. Because, all right, they think more abstractly, and the more abstractly you think, the more you can lose a connection. You get so abstract with all your different abstract thoughts that you end up cutting your ear off and sending it to your girlfriend. Yeah, like Van Gogh. That's where. No, I'm just. But not everybody does that. Some people, especially those that are faith based, are they harness it and use it for good. If you have God holding it all together, then whatever side of the brain you're using, you're going to be doing fine. And then my final verse, when I get to it, you'll see that peace comes from God, and as long as we put Him at the center, and when things get really tough, just give it to Jesus. That's what we're told throughout the scriptures. Give it to Jesus, and there's a reason for that, because our brains are only meant to handle so much stress, so much pain, so much anguish, so much of any one thing, even pleasure, that when it gets to a certain point, you just have to give it over to God because it's more than you can handle. Yes, exactly. Oh, the true. Those people that are both. I mean, there's some people that are equally balanced or close to it. There's some that are far right and far left, and there's some. I consider myself kind of in the balance because I do crafts and artistic stuff, and I love music and all. I can't play it and all that so much because I put so much other stuff in there. I guess I could eventually learn more about music, but I just don't have the time and space to do it. Go ahead. Okay. Well, the brain. Okay. The the brain can be retrained and will the brain can and will be retrained. As a matter of fact, it's retrained several times throughout our lifespan. As we mature, things in our bodies change, and we have to adapt physically to them. We want to be King Kong and climb the Empire State Building, but that stops, as you get a certain age. Your brain has to be adjusted and has to be modified for our new futures. After my incident, I had to know that I could no longer go spelunking down in caves. I could no longer hike up certain types of terrain. I learned to deal with more level trails, things that were safer. But throughout our life, as we've had to develop new skills, yes, that's one of the true gifts of God to the human mind, to the human being, is the fact that we can retrain, that we can always learn. And the more we learn, especially reading, another thing I didn't get to put in here because I knew my time was going to run out. The more we read in life, reading by far, and some of the music composition, if you're writing it and playing it in certain ways, those things will actually increase the longevity of the mind exponentially. Somebody that has Alzheimer's, you'll find that the people with the worst cases of Alzheimer's read the fewest books. And I've seen that in study after study after study in my science. That the more books that somebody read, the longer their brain lasts. And why is that? Because reading of all things, but also knowing a whole lot of music and composing music and all that does the same thing too. So with the bookworms and the rockers, you can get together and both of you can have a long lasting, plus a good heart, humor, and John's full of knowledge of his own type. You know what I'm saying? I shouldn't. You know what I mean, John? That's that will keep his mind young, I'm sure, for a very long time to come. Yes. true taste, your brain is 100% pretty much, about 98%. Yes, we can override it, like beer. I never got the thing with beer. When I was 18, I tried drinking beer, and it was just nasty. So, and I'm like, it tastes like something that comes out of, animals. And I'm like, to me, and I apologize for those that happen to like cerveza, but I'm not a beer, or I'm not even alcohol of any kind. I've lost all taste for alcohol, have for years and years. But the fact is, you can override your taste, like coffee, like you're talking about coffee, the bitterness of coffee. To me, coffee's as bitter as it gets. I have to throw like 10 pounds of creamer and sugar to be able to absorb the coffee. I can't do it. And even then, it leaves this taste in my mouth. I taste bitter, So I don't do coffee. But I'm a super taster too, and I'll explain that if we have time at the end. All that changes in an average of taste, whether it be music or flavor, usually about once every 7 years throughout your entire life. It will change. All right, your brain decides what it likes. You may be influenced from the outside because what all they're listening to, you listen to because that's what's available, right? Often. Since that's what's available, you find your brain picks in that classification, in that selection, what it likes best. And then it picks it. Exactly. Well, that's style, and that goes with another whole system. That's basically commercialism and style and trending setting and all that. That does dictate some, but there's all those people that are themselves. They just go against the system, and they just choose what they want to listen to. So, yes, you do have peer pressure, and you do have what's available in our availability that changes what we like and dislike. However, our brain in itself decides from that selection process what's available, what it wants. And it generally does it once every 7 years. Like, if you don't like something, I always say, try it in a few years because your taste may change. I used to not like broccoli. Now I love it. I used to not like other vegetables or other things. I used to not eat cooked spinach, and now I love it. There's just things change. Yes. Well, yeah, there's some things like that. The Bible tells us to store the Word of God in our hearts, right? So we read it sometimes, and we can recall it when we need it, but we can't just remember exactly what we read at the time. There are some things you can do if you want more recall at the time. There's like Pastor Tim's put me onto this site where you can actually listen to the Bible, and you can listen to it annotated with noises and sounds and everything that goes along with the scriptures. And you can listen and read in combination, and sometimes that'll help because it brings it to life for us. Sometimes reading dry words on a page, and don't get me wrong, I'm not calling the Bible dry, but any kind of writing on a page can, is just words. Now, the reason why words, I was talking earlier, why the more we read, the better our minds get for longevity. The reason why is because look at what you're doing when you're reading. You're converting an abstract symbol into a word, into syllables, into a visual association in your brain, which enacts the smell, the taste, and the stuff from your entire life through like a Rolodex system back out to an experience so that you can comprehend what you've read. So you enact all these different systems. And when you do that, what it does is that it allows more and more synapses to be connected with more and more brain cells. So the more we do that, the stronger and the longer our brains will last, even under attack, the attack of a disease such as Alzheimer's. Yes, in the back. Different people, different ways. Morning people remember more in the morning. Evening people remember more in the evening. Absolutely, but it depends on your own person. How your personal biological clock, your circadian rhythm, so to speak, reacts best. Some people are night owls. Some people are morning. Be up 5 in the morning and read 3 chapters, remember every word. And some people can't even remember the first word until they've had the first 3 cups of coffee and breakfast and then lunch. You can discipline yourself around it, but you'll never, you can discipline yourself around it, but your peak times are your peak times. You can force yourself to, say you're not a morning person, you can force yourself that 5 a.m. read, but it's going to be more of a struggle than it would be at 6 p.m. when you're ready to go. but you can discipline. You can discipline yourself around anything. People walk on hot coals. I'm not saying that's a comparison, but you know what I mean. People can discipline themselves to do anything if they put their mind to it. Especially if the faith of God. I mean, it took a lot. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It took them a whole lot of discipline not to scream and run when they're getting ready to get thrown in that furnace. But they knew and trusted and loved God, and in they went without kicking and screaming. Yes, in the back. And there's the midday people too. How can it be that there's morning and night and right? Yes. Oh, your jet lag. No, well, I'm saying the reason why you have conditions like jet lag is because at first you'll eventually change because light. All right, light comes into our eyeballs, and the amount of light we have given in a given day on a time scale. Now you're gonna make me get more scientific, but here we go. All right, because the amount of light that attaches to our eyes goes into our amygdala, goes into it goes into our circadian systems of our brain, and allows us to adjust for different daytimes. That's why we get biological clocks. Same thing happens in chickens. They lay better on the longer day span. So in the big chicken farms where they raise eggs, they put artificial light on them so they'll lay eggs at a longer time. More light equals more awake time. And we adjust for the winter. We adjust for daylight savings. We adjust for all these different things that encounter in our lives, whether we're in Japan or whether we're in Kentucky. We have a new schedule, a new amount of light, and a new different time of that light. So after we get past our lag, the jet lag, getting over it stage, then you operate normally on that time scale. It just takes a little time to get used to it. Yes, the light more than anything. And God placed that in the heaven. That's why God put the sun and moon in before he put us in. Because we would all went nuts without the sun and the moon and everything to put us in line. Exactly. And anybody that functions at night thinks that anybody that wants to sleep at 6 o'clock is boring or incompatible with them. You know what I'm saying? Because they're ready to go and the other person's ready to go to bed. That's why it's good to be with people. Generally, it works better. It seems, I'm not Mr. Match or nothing, but it just seems better if you're on the same schedule or can learn to be on the same schedule. All right. Next, well, I want to get some of these the more of the limbic system right here. I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly. It monitors. Well, where am I at anyway? Oh, I know. I was talking about time. I didn't have no idea what time it is. I didn't bring anything up here with the time on it. 5 days. Oh, I got a little time, so I can take this leisurely, and I still may get done. Yeah, I see it right here. Um, it monitors our internal and external environment, as we talked about. It's our anxiety switch is exactly where I stopped off, I believe. The limbic system is also responsible for the. Nope, we got past that. Yep. It regulates the functioning of the. Here's where I was at. It regulates the functioning of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which means it controls things like pulse, blood pressure, breathing, and arousal in response to emotional circumstances. Anybody that's married can understand that. Anybody that's human can understand that, but properly in marriage you can understand that. The limbic system mediates all aspects of emotion and motivational functioning, such as desire for food, feelings of anger, fear, pain, pleasure, and sexual desire. A number of factors can significantly impair the limbic system function, such as chemical exposure. This can be from drugs, or this can be from lawn chemicals or pesticides. You never know where it's going to come from. Virus or infection, inflammation, psychological and emotional trauma, accumulated stress, physical trauma, not limited to brain injuries. Under normal circumstances, the protective mechanism of the limbic system would only become activated in times of appropriate danger or threat. However, once the limbic system is impaired, It can cause sensory perceptions and protective responses. Over time, this pattern of distorted reaction becomes habitual and can result in a range of neurological, immunological, and endocrine system abnormalities. This is the heart, folks, we're talking about here. When the heart has. Exactly. Limbic system impairment is involved in a number of difficult illnesses, such as multiple chemical sensitivity, people that are allergic to everything, Gulf War syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, food sensitivity, chronic pain, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, electric hypersensitivity syndrome. Each of these conditions has their own distinct host of symptoms. However, many symptoms overlap. Once a limbic system impairment is established, it is not uncommon to develop additional limbic system-related illnesses. This is our heart, folks, and we have a problem with it, or something gets damaged with it. It hurts everything. It hurts our logic, and it hurts our physical bodies. And, I believe in the future we'll be able to heal more of these things. I believe that we're going to come up with a tailored genetic treatment for each and every individual that suffers from any of these conditions that can go in there and rebuild the piece of the hippocampus or amygdala that is necessary. I really believe that's coming. There's a whole lot of research involved in that worldwide. All right, sin and the reward pathways of the brain. This is what the meat and potatoes of what I'm here to tell you guys about, what sin changes and does to the brain. When it comes to the battlefield of the mind, no other stumbling block is as big as the sin nature of man and what it does chemically, physically, and psychologically to the human brain. All right. Any questions so far on the limbic system, Anybody want to see another pointer of the limbic system? All right, I've got a slide up there and a detailed description. I really can't read it down here, but it's a whole lot of writing about each and every little piece of the limbic system. I'm going to make, when Pastor Tim puts all this online, I got electronic copies of it, make that available so you can read it on your own. And if you have any questions, I can turn it into a PDF file. Okay. Well, we can do that so that the PowerPoints are available because there's apparently it wasn't as clear as I was hoping it would be up there, so I'm not going to try to read through that. But, yeah, I can get printed or we can get copies online with the other lesson plans that'll detail all that. Yes? Yes, the limbic system. No problem. No problem. Yeah. Well, and with those three conditions, all areas of your brain were affected. The limbic system more than anything, but your visual cortex. I was once put on ketamine without Versatid or a reversing agent, and they let me wake up on that stuff. And this is after my trauma incident, and my walls were melting, and my doctors and nurses were praying mantises coming to eat me. That was the most traumatic thing I had ever been through. I called my sister totally freaking out. They're going to eat me. She's like, who's going to eat you? That's like, they're going to eat me. That's all I could say. I was so panicked. And it was just the drug reaction that they gave me. It's not a condition you want to be in. I never understand why people want to do angel dust or LSD or anything that does this to you naturally. I just, no go. It is. I mean, it terrified me. I know a man that lives in Georgetown. I won't give any names, but he took acid when he was young. It permanently altered his brain. To this day, he's vacuuming the carpet, and he'll see it on fire. It's permanent. Things like acid can leave permanent holes. Ecstasy, things like that can leave permanent holes in pathways of your brain. And they can reenact and re-affect you your entire life. And people think, oh, it's a fun time now. Well, that fun time now, when I'm 80, vacuuming my carpet, it's not going to be so fun anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's just not the way. I've never had those particular drugs, thank goodness. I've had enough things in my life I shouldn't have been involved in at a younger age. But I'm telling you, I just don't understand why people want to alter their consciousness to that degree. Yeah, disease is the same thing because all those bugs or bacterias and such, they release toxins. And those toxins are just same as LSD and other brain chemicals that actually cause hallucinations. Anybody here heard of the witch trials? back then, the poor people, about in the 1600s, the poor people ate a lot of rye bread. When they ate rye bread, it was stored in grain in stone silos. There wasn't any waterproofing. The grain would get moldy. The same mold that makes magic mushrooms grew in the rye grain in the storage. So these people were eating this magic mushroom bread and seeing witch activity, and they killed people for this. There's actually a long scientific name for that, and I'm not going to bring it up right now. But anyway, just know that this mold poisoning caused people to hallucinate to the point of murdering each other. Okay, no problem. We can wrap this up, and I won't have to rush, and I won't have to leave anything out, I don't believe. All right. The act of sinning by abusing substances that destroy the temple of our mind, heart, and soul, which is our brain. We've everybody established that our mind, heart, soul, and is all parts of our brain, basically. It's where we reside. It robs everyone involved. Not only does it take away from the users, it takes away from their families and their friends and their loved ones. Anything that we do that causes the death of large numbers of brain cells will hinder the connections and the information retrieval ability of the brain, and this will become permanent. You can rejuvenate some of it. Like if you say you smoked marijuana for 20 years and you quit, some of it will come back, but some of it will be permanent. You can redevelop some, but not. The brain is and it's a good thing that the brain doesn't divide. Could you imagine all your memories doubling every other day? You couldn't handle it. That's why, number one, and number two, our brain lives in a small hole in our head, in our cranium, and there's not enough room for it to divide. So those things keep it in check. But anyway, when we destroy it, it often does not come back. All right. Drugs such as alcohol, cocaine, opiates such as pain pills, heroin, and morphine all cause issues. One of the most degrading drugs to the human brain is marijuana and the THC that it contains, which destroys huge numbers of brain cells. I mean, I'm hearing all this push for legalizing marijuana and how it doesn't harm anybody. Number one, it puts 3 times more tar in the lungs than tobacco smoke does. Number two, on the next page, you'll see a nice little image of a lifetime smoker of cannabis and a non-user's brain. If you remember, I told you about higher reasoning, intelligent thought, logical decision-making happens in the gray area and the outside of your brain. Look at the cannabis user's brain on the right. He's missing over 2/3 of his gray matter, his higher reasoning. This person would be, excuse my language, as dumb as a stump. Yes, pot, marijuana. That one? Yeah, pardon my language. Sorry about that. Not necessarily, but I've known a couple people that were what they called burned out. Has anybody watched Ozzy Osbourne nowadays? The man barely doesn't trip over his own tongue. He's burned out. No offense, it's just his life choices. Anybody can be in that condition, though. You can fry, and when you're fried, you're done. I've known several people that were fried, and they're just below average intelligent. Let's put it that way. Even though these images seem similar in some ways, they're very different where it counts. It is the thin gray layer on the outside of the brain, known as the cerebral cortex, that processes and stores logical thoughts and normal memories. It is this area that is most harmed by drug use. Your intelligence centers, your ability to make logical choices. You damage those things and you make more illogical choices. In a strange sense, like when people are drinking like a lot of alcohol, their logic goes down. What doesn't go down? Their emotions. Their emotions come out because, what keeps our emotions in check? Our mind keeps our emotions in check. Yes? Yeah, and it's not their true self. It's an artificial true self. What you actually created is a man lizard, woman lizard. You've taken away higher reasoning. You left the animal part of the brain. Not saying that people come from animals. I'm just saying when you look at the heart is an emotional thing. It's the limbic system of the brain. It's the last thing to be put out from alcohol or any other drug. Why is that? What centers are in there we talked about earlier? Breathing, heart, This is the point when you get people with alcohol poisoning that die because you start shutting down the limbic system, the heart. Once you shut down the heart of the brain, it's over. You've committed death to that person because they can no longer breathe and they can no longer have a coronary function. Anyway, next comes a little picture that we have, and we have slides up there. Thank you for bringing that slide. Go to the next slide, that slide. Okay, there we are. This will be the last slide for tonight. And this basically is the reward pathway system of the brain. And who here has heard of the chemical dopamine? All right. Anybody that's read much about science knows that dopamine is the pleasure chemical of the human brain. Dopamine is released from this little thing called the VTA region of the brain. It sits right on top of the pons, the brain stem of the brain, okay? So dopamine is released from this. Dopamine travels up through these channels into this little thin layer that follows this commissure right here between the left and right brains, okay? This thing goes out over top and over both sides of the brain, and it underlies the entire cerebral cortex, our sense of logic, higher learning, control. Well, dopamine comes through this thin layer called the nucleus accumbens, and what that does is it causes euphoria. It causes pleasure. It causes happiness. It causes, right here, it says reward, salience, pleasure, euphoria, motor function, other words, fine-tuning, compulsion, and, the last word I can't really read, but just, perseveration. Basically a lack of self-preservation. Anyway, it affects the hippocampus, which affects memory, which affects them, with the amygdala and the hippocampus and the mammillary bodies that all affect memory. So basically that's why some people have blackouts and they can't remember what they did when they were drinking because they've shut down the memory creation center. Now, when it comes to abusing these substances, this is finally on my last page and we'll get done. Not only do substances and drugs cause this, but so does sexual gratification. All right, sexual gratification via the confines of marriage is normal and healthy. However, the abuse of sexual stimulation, such as pornography, lusting of people outside of marriage, and excessive self-stimulation, results in sexual tolerance. Sexual tolerance, just as drug-induced tolerance, leads to increased use of the activity or substance. More and more perverted actions are needed to fulfill the increasing desire. God tells us this in the scriptures with Romans. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves. And it goes on to say, the more perverted they are, the more perverted they get. Eventually, they switch from normal habits and the reason why is they worship things of the world instead of God, idolatry. What is drug use? What is sin? Is it not a form of idolatry? Not being happy with the consciousness that God gave you and wanting to alter it in some way? Yes, but in the same time, it becomes harder for the brain to sense that path. Because say you travel on that path barefoot, and the more you walk down that path, the tougher your feet get. And the more your feet get toughened, the less you feel it. We're going to get to that in a minute. This is going to be now I'm going to deal with the final stages and problems with sin and addiction. The issue of sin and reward derives from the pleasure pathways of the entire brain known as the dopaminergic pathways, basically the dopamine pathways, folks. Dopamine, the pleasure chemical of the brain, affects the entire cerebral cortex through a layer known as the nucleus accumbens. All that means is nucleus core, accumbens thin layer. So it's a thin layer that runs under the entire cortex, our higher reasoning center, that dopamine attaches to and causes the chain reaction up through the cortex, up through our logical centers of our brain. Okay, this chemical causes feelings of euphoria, excitement, and contentment. Most drugs and sexual activities create huge releases of dopamine, which is quite pleasurable. The problem is tolerance. The human mind is not supposed to run on excess levels of dopamine. As a result, the brain downregulates dopamine levels, and more of the substance or behavior is needed to get the same level of dopamine. This will lead to eventual overdose or complete perversion of the individual involved. As the brain has downregulated dopamine, sudden absence of the substance causes extreme withdrawal symptoms. Anybody here have had a deal or known anybody that's gone through like an opiate withdrawal? Caffeine withdrawal. I've done that, and recently, coming back out of all that stuff. Yes, sin. All right, it starts off with, oh, I'll look at this. It won't be bad if I look at this little image here on the computer. Next thing you know, you're looking at more of those images. And those standard images are no longer exciting you. So now you're looking at more twisted stuff. It gets into bondage. And then bondage begets brutality and rape scenarios in some cases. Other cases, it could lead into pedophilia. It could lead into bestiality. It can lead to more and more perverted acts to get the same sexual fulfillment. Yes, it's self-created and self-fulfilled. It is basically, I love my country and I love my church, and it's basically gotten to where it's a me, me, me society. If it makes me feel good, it's okay. And whatever it takes to make me feel good, it's okay. Not that I believe this. This is just how the society has gone. And it's taken more and more perverted acts. All right, we're pushing for gay marriage right here in America. All right, so we allow gay marriage. Suddenly, that's not enough perversion. What's next? We're going to start letting people marry animals? Starting to let them marry children? And call pedophilia normal? What I'm saying is not that it all is going to force that way, but enough perversion down enough pathways leads. I'm not trying to do a slippery slope argument here. It's just shown. You look at anybody that's in prison for violent sexual crimes, you'll find that they started out with a soft porn when they were young, often, or some other, Oh, yeah. Yes, they went down the orgy path with the baths and all that stuff, and then there was lead. They cooked in lead pots with sweet wine, and the lead made the sweetness stronger, so they'd cook it with more and more lead. So between lead poisoning and perversion, Rome did itself in. Yes. Yeah, that's the extreme steps. Exactly. Exactly. Enough pressure, and then everybody's on board. Normal media, exactly. Normal media. I remember the song, songs like Jesse's Girl and Angel and the Centerfold and all those little songs where they were like little rock and roll warnings of what's going to happen. His memory's been stripped. His mind's been ripped because his person he had a crush on is now in some dirty magazine he saw. Sorry about that. But you know what I'm saying? It's not the best example, but that's what happens. People's minds are stripped. Their desires are ripped. Their pathways are damaged or overburdened. And it happens from the smallest of things. Oh, it won't hurt if I look at little Susie. She's overage in that bikini. But the next thing you know, 2 years down the road, you're raping little Susie in that bikini. Not saying that, it's a progression. It leads one to another. And, it's just, there's no safe sin. It's just bottom line, there's no safe sin. And when you practice it, all of it leads to death. Not just spiritual death, but physical death. If you sin in promiscuity, eventually you're going to catch a disease, or you're going to get a hold of somebody else's girl and get shot, or something will happen in the long run. You'll catch something, you'll get so burned out on it, you'll even hurt yourself because sex means nothing anymore. Well, it starts getting, then finally the door gets kicked open, but you're right. So I'm just going to finish up real quick here. The human mind is not supposed to run on excess dopamine levels, all right? When it's running on higher levels, it downregulates it. When we take the substance away, it causes severe withdrawal, okay? So more and more of the behavior is needed to get the same level of dopamine. This will lead to eventual overdose or complete perversion of the individual involved. As the brain is downregulated, dopamine, sudden absence of the substance causes extreme withdrawal symptoms. Even after withdrawal is over, the individual could have cravings for the rest of their life. They have so well burned those pathways. All it takes for a heroin addict to see a needle laying there, and he's ready to grab it again, or she's ready to grab it again. All it takes is for an alcoholic to see an open bottle of liquor there, and they're going to grab it again. Everybody's like, well, all these things don't hurt to have all these things, at our fingertips. Well, it's going to hurt anybody that's addicted to these things, but there's only one answer to all this, each and every time, and it always falls back to this. There's only one way to avoid the pitfalls of sin, and that is to seek the peace of God. Isaiah says it best when he wrote, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you." Isaiah 26:3, New King James Version. Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead. Dopamine. And it's dope. You hear about dope? The drug's dope, but dopamine is the chemical of the brain. Yes. Yes. But au contraire, John, you could have to deal with it. If you chose to go down that path, even married, you know how many marriages are destroyed by porn? Right. Right. Oh, you're excited because you love your wife and you honor your vows of marriage. If you go off that path, though, if you're married and you're suddenly watching porn, what's porn? It's an illogical and untrue form of sexuality that you will never achieve. Oh, the reason why is because God, trusting in God and knowing God and using the strength He gives us, will always make it exciting. When you love your wife and you bring that true commitment and that love to your relationship, you're always going to be excited. I mean, there's nothing wrong. There's some people that do like little skits or role play, little things like that are harmless. I mean, not saying keep it personal. Everybody has their own thing. Just don't cross the line. Don't make your other significant other uncomfortable, and don't get to where it takes that to have any kind of fulfillment in life. Right. Well, a lot of people don't make that bridge or that connection, John, and they get lost in it, and it destroys their marriage, unfortunately. You open the door, exactly.
Because you don't know what you don't know,
Exactly.
ultimately.
Basically, yes. Sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Woo! I tell you what, one thing I love about this church is we have got one bad teaching team. I just feel like we've got the whole spectrum, and I'm just really excited to have Tim with us, and then of course Dr. Robinson, and just I mean, it's so awesome because when we have somebody different teach, you don't get you don't get a mini me or you get a totally different angle than I am even capable of giving, and I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, of course. I know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. God is good. Amen. I'm not going to delay anymore because I know our children are anxiously awaiting us. But keep in mind, you know how he talked about the dopamines and them being released and you needing more and more and more of it to function? That's called addiction, folks. And when we get to that level of addiction, the only way to get free is deliverance. Amen. And we are wanting to start a program. And I don't have the training scheduled yet. I want to meet with our ministers and make sure we've got our ducks in a row. But we are going to start a training of probably here in the next couple of months on how to help people overcome addictions in any kind. And if you're interested in that, then let me know, and we'll get that set up. God bless you. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the mind. We thank you that it can be developed. We think it can be trained. And, Lord, we thank you that it can be healed by your Holy Spirit. Help us, Lord, to guard our hearts, to guard our minds, and to guard our souls. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless. Go get your kids. Our workers are probably like being hung from the rafters right now.